My Taekwondo instructor once told all of his students that only 5 substances were allowed on the dojang floor: water, sweat, tears, blood, and puke. Like any art, the martial art of Taekwondo offers infinite possibilities for complications and combinations. But becoming proficient in any art is usually not that complicated. It takes hard work. Years of it. And few of us can get there without good coaches and mentors to guide us. They put before us the hard, unglamorous, and sometimes tedious reality of the work that leads to mastery, all while stoking the passion and wonder that set us on the path to mastery in the first place. Walker, you know what it's like to be a mentor. A few years after you got the hang of logging, you were training kids who had brand new work boots and little sense for the woods. As the years went by, you wrote, greenhorns would show up and you'd have to teach them the ropes. You'd tell a guy not to stand where he was because the tree above him could be ripped over and end up in his lap. The greenhorn would scoff, and 2 minutes later he'd be trapped under the very tree you just warned him about. A good mentor has been there. You knew where that tree was going to land because you'd watched felled trees come down many times. And so when you talked about it, you spoke with authority, even if the greenhorn didn't listen the first time. As long as you keep growing and keep pushing into new endeavors, you'll need a mentor, someone who's been where you're going. Unfortunately. Just like the models we talked about a few letters ago, people often stop seeking out mentors when they become adults. I've had many mentors in my life, Walker. We've talked about some of them, Anne and Roger Richardson, Earl Blair. I'm in my late 30s, and I still need and benefit from mentors. About 2 years after I'd come back from Iraq, I met Anne-Marie Burgoyne, an experienced executive who worked with many social entrepreneurs before me. She became a member of my board, and her guidance on team building, fundraising, and program design helped me grow a mission that had served a few dozen veterans to one that has served thousands. I have editors who shape my writing. One of them, Barbara Osberg, has been reading my work since I was 16 years old, and I have others, like my dad and my boxing coach, Earl Blair, who still offer advice that helps to give focus to my life. This is pretty straightforward. I know that there are a lot of people who know much more than I do. So I try to find them, listen to them, and learn from them. There's a lot to say about the difference mentors can make in your life. But even if you're with me on that, maybe you're starting with a more basic question. Why would someone put in the work to be a mentor in the first place? Why would she take time away from her own projects, her own ambitions, and her own accomplishments to build a connection with someone who hasn't been there and who knows only a fraction of what she knows? Well, why did you put in the work to show new loggers the ropes? I'm sure you had plenty of reasons. Maybe it was part of your job description. Maybe it was a bit of an ego trip. But, knowing you, I think there was also something else, something more simple and powerful. You loved the work. You'd been pretending to be a logger since you could walk, and now that you had finally made it into the woods, you wanted to make sure that the kids who came up after you respected the work as much as you did. Mastering a machine powerful enough to cut through a redwood, putting up with aches and pains without whining, clocking in for work even when your hands were curled into fists from handling a chainsaw all day. When you write about logging in your letters, you're describing not just a job, but a way of life. And part of respecting a way of life is passing it on, doing what you can to make sure it doesn't die with you. That goes for everyone from loggers to sportswriters to sculptors. How do you explain the dad who spends 3 or 4 nights a week to get his little league team ready to play in front of a handful of parents in the bleachers? How do you explain the teacher who's still in the classroom after a full day of work, going over the Pythagorean theorem with a 6th grader one more time? I don't think you can explain such actions without taking seriously mentors' love of what they do. And that's what you're looking for in a mentor, Walker, someone who respects whatever it is, gardening, parenting, or the concrete business, as much as you respected logging. You can spend a lifetime reading books about painting without ever learning how to paint a tree. You can spend a lifetime watching videos of the great Taekwondo masters without ever learning how to throw a single kick. You can pursue any practice you like without a mentor, and you can build knowledge, but it's unlikely that you'll ever build mastery. A mentor teaches you everything you can't learn from a book. One of the people who has helped me think more clearly about the value of mentors is the British philosopher, Michael Oakeshott. He taught that every activity relies on two kinds of knowledge, technical and practical. Technical knowledge can be captured in writing, rules, and mechanical practice. You grow in technical knowledge by absorbing information, not by doing. Practical knowledge, on the other hand, exists only in use and, unlike technique, cannot be formulated in rules. It's padded on by experience, through communities. It's the kind of knowledge that we learn directly from others, as coaches teach players and masters teach their apprentices. I like to think of this as the difference between knowing that and knowing how. You can learn facts on your own. But if you want to know how to do something, from baking a cake to writing a story to disciplining a child, you usually have to be shown. The best mentors show us how. Different disciplines create different kinds of knowledge. If you consider the sum total of what humans know about physics, you'll find that nearly all of it exists as technical knowledge scattered among books, journals, and articles. If you consider the sum total of what humans know about Taekwondo, however, you'll find that only a small fraction of this knowledge has been captured and written down. So where is the rest of it? It's in the practice of the greatest masters, and it continues to exist because it's passed down to their students. If the masters disappeared tomorrow, the art of Taekwondo would likely disappear too. The practice of every discipline requires both kinds of knowledge. Just as you can learn something about Taekwondo from books, there's a part of being a good physicist that you can't learn from books. My point is that you'll waste your time and energy unless you think clearly about the kind of knowledge you're after. Sometimes you'll need to be sure you find the right books. But if you're involved in a discipline like Taekwondo or parenting or leadership, you'll need to find the right mentors. People will often scour the earth searching for the right book, but take whatever coach, teacher, trainer, or mentor who comes along. It's not that one kind of knowledge is more important than the other. We only run into a problem if we convince ourselves that the only knowledge that matters is the kind that can be easily packaged. Our mastery of the practices that matter, including the practice of living a good life, comes from people and through relationships. It comes from coaches, teachers, trainers, and mentors. It's easy to find people willing to give you advice. It's hard to find people with advice worth giving. Ideas are cheap. Advice is easy. And too often, giving advice is something that people do to reinforce their own deflated sense of self. It's worth pausing, then, to consider a few of the people who will not be able to help you. Some people love to make their lessons overly complicated. If a mentor becomes lost in his lesson, you can usually assume one of several things. 1. The mentor hasn't mastered the material. 2. The mentor is trying to make himself seem important. Or 3. The mentor can't remember what it was like to learn the material himself. I'm not suggesting that there's no such thing as complex material, or that you can expect your mentors to dumb things down for you. Instead, I'm suggesting that it's much easier to make information complex than it is to make it simple. A good mentor will focus on a simple thing that you can learn in order to get better. There's a great line on this from the mathematician Blaise Pascal. He once wrote at the end of a letter to a friend, "I have made this longer than usual, because I have not had time to make it shorter." The worst mentors are often the ones who say, about any complex subject, "Now, young man, woman, let me tell you how things really work." There is no one way that the world works. In some fields, there are definite rights and wrongs. In many arts and activities, however, we leave the realm of right and wrong and enter the realm of better and worse, more or less. How do you greet your students on the first day of class? How do you start a speech? How do you build a fence? How do you tend a garden? How do you paint a painting? We rely on mentors for the kind of knowledge that can't be captured in rules and certainties. We go to mentors for stories, experience, practice, and perspective. And good mentors will have the kind of humility that the truly excellent tend to possess. They'll understand that their own experience is a small piece of a much larger body of knowledge. A good mentor will aim first not to give advice or instruct activities that stress the mentor's superiority to the student, but to achieve understanding and then to share it. We can't always achieve simplicity. Sometimes complex things must be appreciated in their complicity. But we can always seek clarity. Clear advice. Clear direction. The master has mastery over her whole craft. She instructs with simple instructions: relax. Breathe deeply. Stand tall. And in this way she gradually pushes her student, one step at a time, past the edge of her previous understanding. Good mentors respect complexity. But because they've learned to separate essentials from distractions, they can offer clarity. The best mentors must know two things: the challenge that's being faced and the person facing it. A mentor who knows one but not the other may be good, but is rarely great. What does it mean for someone to know your challenge? To know your challenge means to have experience of the central question before you. Unfortunately, a lot of bad advice is given and taken because people fail to identify the central question they face before acting. Imagine someone who has to make a choice between staying in school and leaving school to pursue a career as a professional dancer. There is a question here about dancing, but it's likely that the central question is about taking risks. So whose advice is worth seeking? Maybe not just a mentor with experience as a dancer, but a mentor with experience as a risk taker. But even having experience of the challenge isn't enough. Advice that may be right for most people may not be right for you. Your mentor may understand how important risk-taking is to a well-lived life. But if she knows you, knows your father is very ill, and knows the history of your relationship with him, she may well advise you to keep other things steady while you spend what's likely to be a last loving year with your dad. A mediocre running coach may know that most leading long-distance runners average a certain number of practice miles per week. But a better coach, having taught runners with your body type, your running cadence, and your personality, may decide to put you on a different program that's right for you. Good teachers care less about proving they have a great system than about finding the best way to make each student grow. This one needs a spur, said Plato, one of history's great teachers, about a student who seemed a little too lazy and self-satisfied. That other one needs a break. He said about a know-it-all too eager to rush ahead in his lessons, who happened to be Aristotle. Extraordinary coaches also know that sometimes the same person who needed a spur last week needs a break this week. Mentors who understand both the challenge and the person in front of them are extraordinarily valuable. They're also quite rare. They're rare for the same reason that true friends are rare: the best relationships are only built over time. I've got a buddy who's a firefighter. The other day, he told me about a study on what separates an excellent firefighter from a novice. Here's how a journalist summed it up. Two groups of firefighters, novices and experts, were shown scenes of fires and asked what they saw. The novices saw what was obvious: the intensity and color of the flames. But the experts saw a story. They used their mental models to infer what must have led to the current state of the fire and to predict what was likeliest to happen next. Note that these inferences and predictions are more than just interesting. They are evidence that the experts are far better prepared than the novices to fight the fire. We'd expect experts to fight fires with more skill than beginners. This study helps us to see why experts are better. Where novices see surface details, the color of the flames, experts perceive patterns, where the fire is likely to go next. They see patterns not because they have a better understanding of the chemistry of fires, but because they have seen more fires. Their experience shapes what they see. In a mentor, you're looking for someone who can look at you and your challenges and see more than surface details. You're looking for someone whose experience can help you to see where to go and what to do next. A similar study helped to identify differences between expert pilots and novice pilots. Top-performing pilots and apprentices listened to recordings of air traffic control radio communications, and then were asked to recall what they heard. The apprentices actually recalled more of the filler words that had no practical significance than the top pilots did. But the expert pilots recalled far more of the important concept words. Because they heard the communications as part of a rich mental model, they could focus their brainpower on what counted. The best mentors have a sense for what matters. And if they don't see or can't hear an important detail, they'll ask you about it. Good mentors, and coaches and teachers, have learned to look at and hear the right things. Standing on a pool deck, I can watch an entire swim race and have no idea why the winner won. The best I can do is say, because she swam faster. I have friends, though, who, standing on the same pool deck and watching the same race right by my side, can see imperfections in a stroke, differences in body position, alterations in the way a hand cuts into the water. I'll have watched the whole thing, but missed the details that made a difference. They'll have seen what mattered. And for that reason, they'd be much, much better swim coaches than I could ever be. Good coaches cut through clutter and chaos. They direct your attention to the details that make a difference. Not all experts are created equal. Philip Tetlock, a political psychologist, proved it by putting together a massive study of expert judgment. Over 20 years, he asked 284 experts, academics, reporters, political officials, and others, to make predictions about world events. The experts made 28,000 predictions in all. Then Tetlock went back to check the results. It wasn't professors who made the best predictions, or politicians. It wasn't liberals or conservatives. The biggest difference was between foxes and hedgehogs. Those terms come from the Greek poet Archilochus, whom we talked about a few letters back. He said, "The fox knows many things, the hedgehog knows one big thing." The fox, the thinker who knows many little things, draws from an eclectic array of traditions, and is better able to improvise in response to changing events, is more successful in predicting the future than the hedgehog, who knows one big thing, toils devotedly within one tradition, and imposes formulaic solutions on ill-defined problems. The best experts and the best mentors have flexible minds. The best experts and the best mentors won't claim to have one gig idea about how the world works. Instead, they will constantly evaluate and reevaluate. They learn. They update their view of the world. In the face of changing facts, they stay humble. Walker, I'd recommend that you avoid the hedgehog who claims to have the answer. Find instead a mentor who is always willing to learn, someone willing to examine everything, including themselves. And another thing about foxes, Walker, people who've built a habit of getting to know many things are much more likely to want to get to know you. And that, as we've said, will be critical to being a good mentor. Resilience is the virtue of growing through suffering and struggle. Most mentors have earned their wisdom only because they have struggled themselves. So keep in mind that in great mentors, you'll find more than expertise in their field. It's likely that you'll also find expertise in the practice of resilience. In Greek mythology, Chiron was a centaur, half horse and half man, and a great teacher. Many of the greatest Greek heroes were sent to study with him. He taught medicine to Asclepius, the first doctor, and navigation to Jason, who led a great sea voyage. Chiron was also a great warrior, and he taught Achilles to wield a sword and spear. Machiavelli wrote about the myth of Chiron and what it tells us about teaching. Achilles, and many other ancient princes, were given to Chiron the centaur to be raised, so that he would look after them with his discipline. To have as teacher a half-beast, half-man means nothing other than that a prince needs to know how to use both natures. It wasn't just what Chiron taught that mattered. It was who he was. The very fact that he was half beast and half man showed his students that to learn a discipline they also had to master themselves. Sometimes the life of the teacher is more than half the lesson. In a lot of what we have to learn, the messenger matters. That's especially true when it comes to teaching about how to live well. I've already written some about Will Guild, aka Big Will. He was a Navy SEAL for over 30 years, served in the nation's most elite units, and accomplished just about everything you could ever hope to accomplish in a military career. When Will stands in front of a class of SEAL candidates and talks about ethics in combat, they listen. His words resonate not just because of the quality of his thinking, but because of the quality of his life. A very capable professor of ethics from Harvard could stand in front of the very same class. He could speak the very same words. And yet they'd have a fraction of the effect of Will's words on that audience. The more complex an endeavor, the more the performance of the student will be tied to the ability of the master instructor. That's why a good PhD student seeks out a particular thesis advisor, and why dancers seek to train with particular dance teachers. In martial arts, people will often say, "She is a black belt under," meaning that she earned her belt from a particular instructor. If all you need to know are the basics, Walker, your coach or mentor won't matter as much. But if you want to become great, you'll need a great coach. The authority of trainers, teachers, and coaches comes from only one place: their willingness to take responsibility for results. The root of the word authority is the Latin word augere, which means grow, increase, or enrich. This is also the root of the words augment and author. In its root, we see that the idea of authority was once tied to someone's ability to author a result. Coaches, trainers, and teachers often have great power. Bad teachers and trainers believe that they have their power because of the position they hold. Good teachers and trainers know that the exercise of power is a responsibility. They are responsible for creating good results in the lives of those subject to their power and influence. Those results are what make their power legitimate. Just as there are master painters of canvases, there are master painters of souls. Like paint, pain has to be applied with care to do its work well. Pain can lead to beauty, and pain can lead to strength, but applying pain recklessly or stupidly creates nothing but mess and ugliness. The philosopher asks a tough question and his fellow citizens have to confront their own ignorance. The boxing coach runs a tough drill and his students have to confront their own weakness. It's easy to make people hurt. It's easy to make a kid do 100 push-ups with a hose in his face. It's easy to put a set of problems in front of a student without giving her any idea how to attack them. There are many bad teachers and brutal trainers who excel at making people uncomfortable. Good teachers are comfortable with their students being uncomfortable, yet they understand that a confrontation with weakness, with ignorance, with pain, is not an end but a beginning. Awareness of our weakness opens a gateway to insight. Bad and brutal trainers can inflict pain, but they have no idea how to tie the hardship they have created to the excellence their students aim to achieve. They have brought the trainee to the palace of insight, but they can't unlock the gate. Embarrassed and confused by their own inability, they usually just keep shouting. A coach who is always shouting usually communicates one thing: I'm out of control. Applying pain in the lives of others puts one in a position of great power and responsibility. Abusive coaches and undisciplined sergeants can gravely harm students and trainees. And maybe worst of all, their reliance on fear can curdle a student's love for a practice into a passionate hatred. I once gave a talk on SEAL team training to a college fraternity. After my talk, a fraternity member asked, if SEAL trainers can do that being make recruits suffer, why can't we do it to pledges? Part of the answer: you cannot do that because you want to do it for the wrong reasons. You want to do it to feel powerful and to satisfy your ego. And part of the answer is that you have not earned the privilege of training someone else. You don't know what you are doing. You are very liable to hurt someone, and if some good result is produced, it will come by accident rather than intention. Any coach or mentor, any fool, for that matter, can apply hardship. To be capable, mentors and coaches must have the right character and the right knowledge. Earlier I wrote that they must understand you and the challenges you're facing. They also have to understand the environment you're working in. Understanding and shaping the environment is essential because, depending on conditions, the same elements can combine to produce completely different results. Consider this analogy: in very hot conditions, 2 hydrogen plus 1 oxygen equals steam. In normal conditions, 2 hydrogen plus 1 oxygen equals water. In very cold conditions, 2 hydrogen plus 1 oxygen equals ice. Steam, water, and ice are made up of the same building blocks, combined in almost the same way, but the environment around them profoundly shapes the form they take. In the same way, the elements of learning are often made up of the same building blocks and are combined in almost the same way. Pain is a part of learning. So is reflection. In some conditions, pain plus reflection equals progress. We struggle. We reflect. We try again and grow stronger. But at other times, pain plus reflection equals whining. We think of how frustrated we are, and we complain rather than grow. In still other conditions, pain plus reflection equals drinking. We're overwhelmed by the difficulty in front of us, and we turn to self-destructive activities. It's important to recognize this, Walker, because the practice of resilience is about finding strategies for living, not formulaic, one-size-fits-all answers. You have to live your answers, and you have to do so in your world. You have to live your answers in your time, in your environment, facing all of the obstacles and using all of the assets you have at hand. Good teachers or coaches know that what worked for the last student may not work for you. And they know that what worked for you yesterday may not work for you today. The anthropologist Sir James Fraser reported that in some Aboriginal tribes of Central Australia, elders at teenagers' initiation rites swung the bull roarer, an ancient instrument that makes an eerie, droning sound when it is whirled through the air. The bull roarers are swung when a boy is being circumcised, and the women and children believe that the roaring noise is the voice of the great spirit Twaniraka, who has come to take the boy away. Twaniraka enters the body of the boy and carries him off into the bush until his wound is healed, when the spirit goes away and the boy returns an initiated man. On the Indonesian island of Seram, each village had a long wooden house for the initiation of young men. Thither the boys who are to be initiated are conducted blindfolded, followed by their parents and relations. When all are assembled before the shed, the high priest calls aloud upon the devils. Immediately a hideous uproar is heard to proceed from the shed. It is made by men with bamboo trumpets, who have been secretly introduced into the building. Then the priests enter the shed, followed by the boys, one at a time. As soon as each boy has disappeared within the precincts, a dull chopping sound is heard, a fearful cry rings out, and a sword or spear, dripping with blood, is thrust through the roof of the shed. This is a token that the boy's head has been cut off, and that the devil has carried him away to the other world, there to regenerate and transform him. The boys remain in the shed for 5 or 9 days. Sitting in the dark, they hear the blast of the bamboo trumpets. As they sit in a row cross-legged, with their hands stretched out, the chief takes his trumpet, and placing the mouth of it on the hands of each lad, speaks through it in strange tones, imitating the voice of the spirits. Finally, the high priest takes them to a lonely place in the forest, and cuts off a lock of hair from the crown of each of their heads. After these initiatory rites the lads are deemed men, and may marry. For thousands of years, people all over the world have applied pain in ceremonies called rites of passage. In a rite of passage, a person transitions from one chapter of life to another. Such ceremonies often mark puberty, the time when a teenager is just acquiring the physical strength and capacities of an adult, but still had the mind of a child. Often in these rites, the young man is taken from the community and isolated in the bush, the desert, or the woods. Over several days he will endure painful tests under the guidance of a cadre of men who have been through the process before. Often, as in the dozens of examples Fraser mentioned in The Golden Bough, the child undergoes a symbolic death and rebirth. His childhood is over, and he is reborn as a man. The intention of this pain is not to punish. The intention is to demonstrate the teenager's maturity. Children don't respond well to stress, they panic and scream and squeal. By passing through pain, the teenager is introduced to the depths of his physical powers and strength as an adult. More important, the child also comes to understand the purposes toward which he can turn his power. The mark of a mature man, one who can be strong enough to protect his community and his family, is his ability to excel under hardship. Through hardship, a boy is taught that a man is community-oriented rather than self-oriented. And here again, Walker, it's good to acknowledge how limited and imperfect these letters are. You and I were both Navy SEALs. Before we joined the SEAL teams, you spent years logging and I spent years boxing. I'm writing to you as my friend, and because of our shared experience some of these thoughts will work for us in a way that they may not work for others. You are also the father of a daughter, and it'll make sense at some point to think about rites of passage for girls, and how women find good mentors and models. When it comes to that, some of the thoughts in this letter may be helpful, others may not, and I'm sure there's a ton that's missing. I'm not writing about how girls move through rites of passage not because it's unimportant, but because I know that I don't know enough. It's another place where you and I have to have the humility to look for help from others. Young men, especially, seek pain. They seek pain because they know that they need to grow, and they sense that growth comes through risk-taking, through fear-seeking, through difficulty. When I first read about the Indonesian rite of passage, it sounded odd to me. It's hard to imagine going through that or putting a son through it. You can imagine an American teenager saying, "That's fucked up." Well, it certainly seems strange to us. Stranger still, however, is the way that many young men come of age in America today. If Shane and Keith didn't have you for a father, it's possible that they'd grow up in a culture that would rarely test them. But they'd find ways to test themselves. What are fraternities doing when they haze new members? What are gangs doing when they invent their own initiations rituals? They're creating rites of passage. Other boys drive too fast and drink too much. They're responding to the desire, particularly among young men, to pass through trials, to treat adulthood as something earned. When we read about an Aboriginal initiation ritual, it sounds a bit dangerous. But compared to American highways, where thousands of boys die every year, most of them speeding or drinking or both, and many of them killing their fellow passengers and other motorists along with themselves, the Aboriginal ritual sounds positively peaceful. Modern rites of passage in fraternities and gangs can be brutal, undisciplined, uncontrolled. They're often driven by young men barely older than the ones they initiate, young men who have stumbled into powers and responsibilities they barely understand. This is what happens when rites of passage are organized without the cultural scaffolding that once held them up and gave them meaning. In a traditional society, the most respected members, priests, chiefs, and elders, presided over the rite of passage. There is some wisdom in this. The trials that change us for the better, rather than scar us, should be overseen by mentors whose authority we respect, who are worthy of our trust. In traditional societies, the rite of passage often marked a young man's transition from child to potential warrior, from one who had to be protected to one who could protect his people when times demanded. And while few of us go to war today, the transition from child to warrior, from dependence to responsibility, still captures something about what it means to attain adulthood. Part of the allure and power of buds in our time, Walker, is that it represents America's greatest initiation ritual. Military training promises the prospective service member a transformation, from civilian to United States Marine, for example. From puke to ranger. From reject to recon. Why is SEAL team training, the most difficult military training in the world, a source of fascination for so many people? It's not because people are captivated by underwater knot tying. In large part it's because SEAL training embodies the possibility of transformation. It's about turning a young man focused on himself into a warrior built to protect society. One of my commanding officers once asked me to put together some thoughts on training in naval special warfare. I came up with a plan called the Complete Warrior. In it, I wrote about a few of the distinctions between the child and the warrior. When the child is skillful, he boasts. When the warrior has a skill, he teaches. When the child is strong, he attacks the weak. When the warrior is strong, he protects the weak. The child criticizes others to make himself feel better. The warrior is his own most demanding critic. The child brandishes symbols as a substitute for substance. The warrior knows that it is not his position, his rank, his education, or his warfare pin that makes him a man, but his honor. The child serves himself. The warrior serves others. The child relishes gossip. The warrior speaks through action. The child never makes mistakes. The warrior admits his mistakes and corrects them. The child's character is cloudy. The warrior's character is clear. If the child can recognize that he needs teaching, he may one day become a warrior. When the warrior meets the child, he seeks to teach him. Maybe you're completely on board with all of this, Walker. But maybe you look around and see that there's no one in your life like the kind of mentor I'm describing. In that case, the question isn't why do I need a mentor? It's how do I find a mentor? There are no guarantees. But I'll tell you what I learned about finding a mentor from Kung Fu films. I'm a sucker for cheap martial arts movies. And when I first started Taekwondo, I rented a bunch of them. In Forbidden Kingdom, the Kung Fu master is on a long journey with a new student. The student thinks he knows more than he does. Jackie Chan, playing the master, starts pouring the student a cup of tea. The cup fills and Jackie continues to pour. The cup overflows and hot tea begins to run down the student's arm. When the student protests, Jackie says, "How can you fill your cup when it's full?" It was a simple, classic Kung Fu movie lesson. No matter how wise the master, he can teach nothing until the student is ready to learn. If you think you know everything, you can't learn anything. The first thing we have to learn is that our cup is empty. There's a saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. As with a lot of popular sayings and quotations, it's unclear exactly who first said this or when. I don't know that it matters. No one can promise you that your mentor will materialize out of nowhere. But the idea stands on its merits. Learning does not happen to you because you want it to. Learning is something you must prepare for. If you want to learn, make yourself ready to learn. This is the first task in any training, and it's the most important, because it is the prerequisite for all other learning. It may take your time to find the right coach or the right mentor. You'll have to ask for advice, do some research, meet people, travel. It all takes time. It's all pretty simple, but there is a real danger in doing it. You might succumb to frustration. Wonder, Plato said, is where all wisdom begins. That's true. But what Plato didn't tell us is that wonder is often weak. It comes, and then we have to make dinner. We feel it, and then the baby needs to be bathed. It touches us, and then we have another ready excuse to let it float out of our lives. Eric Hoffer once wrote, "That which is unique and worthwhile in us makes itself felt only in flashes." If we do not know how to catch and savor the flashes, we are without growth and exhilaration. Wonder is the sense of our smallness in the presence of something greater. But it is not fear. We don't want to run from the object of our wonder, but to come closer to it. We want to learn more about it. And that takes effort. It also takes patience. It's hard to stay curious. It's hard to keep wonder alive. But you've always been willing to do hard things, Walker. So do it again now. Savor the flashes of wonder that light your life, keep your curiosity alive, and soon enough you'll find the right mentor.